Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack, your resident space policy advocate.
And I'm Newton. I'm your guy for space technology.
Welcome back. Happy New Year, Newton. It's 2019.
New year, same space.
Almost like the title of our episode.
Yeah, we haven't done a show in a while. It's been a while. We both got a little busy with holidays. Something happened. Yeah, with work. The government is no, it's not even operating at this point.
No, like quite literally. If you guys are listening to this in the future, so you might know that the government is back. But for us, if we assume that you'll be listening to this on day 19 of the third government shutdown under the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's
third in 365 days, might I add.
It's weird. It's like, if only I knew that this guy had a history of not paying his employees and kicking them out. All right. Anyway,
I think I shared something on Facebook similar to that.
We've been off for a while. We've both been busy. We've both been working on getting a little bit of a more enhanced environment for recording these podcasts, as well as a group to do so with. And once again, there will be news on that coming up in 2019. But outside of that, Happy New Year. We are ready to kick off this year with a little bit of an episode that alters our format just a tad. We're going to talk about things that are coming up in the new year, sort of a forward-looking podcast. With our latest from Washington, we'll talk about the Space Force and the future of the Space Force, the House wanting to fund NASA to some extent while we're under the government shutdown, as well as a budget tracker that Jack has put together. We're going to forgo our usual space news highlight of the week, as well as our international news, to talk about what's happening basically every month in technology for all of 2019. And then in Coming Soon to Space, we're going to be talking about what's happening in the skies and what you can look forward to literally in space in 2019. All right, Jack, kick us off.
All right, so the next 12 months in space, like you were saying, Newton, are going to be very interesting. You're going to talk a lot about the tech side of it. I'm here to talk about policy. You've kind of thrown me into a lurch here because I can't predict everything that's going to happen in policy. Policy doesn't happen on a schedule, obviously. Otherwise, we would have a government.
It's okay. Right, you're not a 24-hour news pundit. I mean, I know they've got this nailed down, but you're just
I guess my
Jack.
days on CNN are far in the future. But so the first thing I want to talk about is the Space Force. I know we talked a little bit about this a couple episodes ago. This was middle of last year. We talked about this. Yeah, it's been about 2 months since our last episode. Anyway,
stop reminding them.
You all know. So Space Force, if you don't know, it would be a sixth branch of the military. It would consolidate all of the different things that the Department of Defense does in space into a new unified armed service. There's a lot of debate on both sides. There's actually probably multiple sides. This is a very dense policy issue. It is a very pretty cut and dry political issue, which I'll get into in a minute. But when it comes to Space Force, the National Space Council is still putting together something called the Space Policy Directive 4. So there's 3 that have so far been signed by the president. They're directives, so they're more guidelines for the agencies in which they oversee. They're not executive orders. They're not saying you as a department have to do X, and they're not an authorization or appropriation from the Congress saying that you have money and the authority to do X. They're directives. They're to push.
Is episode or directive 4 where the story actually starts getting good? Is that?
Sort of. It's sort of like a new hope for what the administration wants to do in space. The previous 3 have been more regulatory focused. This one is an actual push for a reorganization. No, the Space Force has nothing to do with the Death Star. And we can go into anything about the Death Star. You guys have seen our live streams. Anyway, so Space Force, not necessarily, it's a very complex policy question. The Congress would have to pass some sort of authorization. They usually do this every year, called the National Defense Authorization Act, which is DoD, other agencies that deal with national defense, all one big package saying these agencies should do X, Y, Z, AA, AB, AC, all that stuff. Like it's a huge bill. It's hundreds of pages long, and it details everything that the Department of Defense and other defense-related agencies should be doing. They usually pass one every year with just minor adjustments to the previous year. Last year, or starting about 2 years ago, Space Force or a Space Corps was proposed. Last year, a Space Force was proposed. It has not gotten past that point. It has died. That thing has only really made it to the floor of the House once, and that amendment was stricken. So what the administration's trying to do is trying to create this pressure from the executive branch, and by doing this directive and telling the Department of Defense to start working towards implementing a Space Force by 2020, the Congress, it sort of puts the ball in the Congress's court as to like actually funding this and saying, yes, the Department of Defense can do this. Policy questions aside, it's a very cut and dry political issue because it's associated with the Trump administration. There's a lot of people who don't like it, and there's a lot of people who really like it, and there's not much room in the middle. So much like a lot of things that this administration does, Space Force there's a lot of public backlash about it, saying that it's an overreach of the federal government. It's not the right timing for it. All the arguments against it kind of coagulate into the side of the aisle that is opposing the president in the House and the Senate. So a poll came out, this was late last year, that the Space Force falls basically on party lines, public support for that, with almost as much as 2-1 Republicans favoring it, whereas Democrats overwhelmingly I think if I'm reading this correctly, like high 80% do not approve of a Space Force. And
that's the public
independents,
you're talking about.
The public. Independents are basically split on this. Granted, in American politics, independents exist as sort of this weird third party thing. When it comes to actual voting records, most people vote D or vote R. There's not really many people that jump between the two of them. So people who tend to lean Republican are for it. People who tend to lean Democrat are against it. The administration with Space Policy Directive 4 and anything that it tries to do with a Democratic House. So also, in case you were not aware, Democrats swept the House on November 6th last year. And Republicans took up 2 seats in the Senate, or increased their lead by 2 seats. So it's a 53-47 majority in the Senate, but there is now over a 40 seat differential in the House that Republicans have to go up against. So any movement on Space Force is going to be very difficult for the administration. It's going to really test their commitment to expanding the United States' presence in space in terms of defense.
Something tells me that they may not have a lot of bandwidth this year, honestly.
Not at all.
On top of a number of other things that are going on. So that should be interesting going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and defense space is only part of it, right? There's civil space and commercial space, and intelligence space is sort of this weird thing that sits between all three of those. The administration go for it.
I was just going to say, that's not to say that the current plans that are sort of in existence, those will continue on, but any sort of new ideas or methods of change or announcements about changing directions with the Space Force, I think you might see a fairly drastic reduction of those. I think they're just going to do whatever they're doing, staying the course, which is not going to sort of allow that entity to grow with any real sense of it becoming an official branch of the U.S. military.
Well, this is the first time in this administration's tenure, in the first time in 2 years in which they've had a portion of the government held by the opposition party. So there is now a concert. There is an institutional part of the federal government that opposes the president's agenda. So it's going to be much harder than it was in the last 2 years for them to make ground on Space Force or any of their other space initiatives. And it was very hard for them over the last 2 years to do that. So it's going to be infinitely more difficult, I would say, for them to move further on Space Force. I think the most that they're going to be able to do over the next 2 years, because of the amount of bandwidth that they have, the political capital that's available to them, and the context in which they're doing this with a presidential election 18 months out, or more than 18 months out, that we might not see a Space Force in the National Defense Authorization Act. We're probably not going to see a Space Force by 2020, but it'll become a pillar within the president's reelection campaign to say, well, the Democrats have opposed national defense in space, right? That's going to be their talking point. And so the political ramifications are a little different than the policy ramifications. It'll be interesting to see how often the National Space Council meets. So far, they have met 4 times in the last 2 years, with the first time being in September of 2017. So it'll be very interesting to see how often that body meets. Going back to the House. Yeah. So we're currently, as we're talking, we're on day 16 of the government shutdown. You're probably listening to this on day 19. And the House late last week on the 4th passed a spending bill. So the House is the chamber of Congress where spending bills tend to originate. They passed a bill that's going on to the Senate. The Senate hopefully will pass it, and then it will go on to the president to be signed. If that happens, we will fund the government through September 30th. The roadblock here is that the president, because of the politics around the border wall and national security and all this stuff, the president is hold fast that he will not sign any bill that does not include at least $5.1 billion for a wall. So this is not a great way to begin the year if you're really into like the policy and politics of budgets. So what has been currently proposed is a continuing resolution through end of February to give time to debate this wall issue, which again, the president has pushed back on and said, I'm not going to sign that. So we're at a stalemate. As of January 6th, 2019, we were at a stalemate, and the government is a portion of the federal government. So just to explain a little bit, the whole federal government is not shut down. There is about 75% of the government has funding. There's about 25% of the government that does not have funding, and that portion of it is shut down. Included in that is NASA, NOAA, Department of Justice, Department of Labor's in there, and then the IRS as well. So there's parts of the federal government that are not functioning, a lot of parts that are still functioning, people are getting paid, but the parts that we care about, NASA and NOAA and National Science Foundation, are not getting paid. And so only essential personnel are currently working for no pay. People who are non-essential are furloughed until further notice.
Yeah.
And that could be
are in
a weird
contractors
place.
Are in very different, in very different places. There are some contractors who have funds paid out for a month, who have funds paid out for a year, some who are paid week to week, or
all
their
just depends on the terms of the contract.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, exactly. So we're in situations where, for instance, I'm a contractor. I'm still working. For now, we're in situations where we've heard stories about janitors and folks like that, who are private contractors for the federal government who have had to stop receiving paychecks. They can't come into work, and some of those folks live, week to week on paychecks. So it's especially damaging for them as well. Particularly at a place like NASA and NOAA, the agencies this podcast deals with regularly, a large number of folks who work at those agencies are government contractors. So they're in just very weird places all across the board.
Even though NASA itself has 18,000 employees, I think it's something about like 1,000 of them are essential. Maybe a little bit like 800 or something are essential. Yeah. Outside of that, I mean, there's 3 or 4 contractors per NASA employee that are working on projects, depending on the center, depending on what part of the country you're in. But here in the DC area, I mean, it's a huge
particularly
number of
here. Yeah, Goddard is filled with contractors.
Yeah. I mean, because it's easier, cheaper. You get a different talent pool. It's there's all these hosts of reasons why the government uses contractors.
People aren't always furloughed during shutdowns. Yeah, there's a tons of reasons people want to work for contractors.
Well, so something I wanted to sort of to move to the next stage of this conversation and then move on from there is that the bill that the House passed is not their original intended language. So the language that the House passed has the numbers from a Senate bill that was passed back in June. So the House passed a bill last May hoping to give NASA $21.5 billion. The Senate responded by passing a bill to give NASA $21.3 billion. The original request that the administration put out last March or end of February last March was $19.9 billion. So it was an increase over what the president reported. And we've talked about this, I think at this point, this will be the third time that I've talked about this on this show, or third cycle that I've started talking about this, is the presidential budget request, which supposedly will be coming for the fiscal year 2020 within the next 2-3 months, assuming we still have a government then. That is the anchor point in which the Congress takes it and says, thank you very much, puts it on the desk and says, all right, are we going to increase or decrease from these levels, depending on what the priorities of the Congress are, the priorities of the president, what they think they can get passed and signed by the president. It's all a political game after that. So the House just passed the $21.3 billion version, which in the show notes, there is a link to, and I've talked about this a couple times, the NASA budget tracker that I have that I made up. It is updated as of September 10th. So it still has all the numbers from the summer over what that 21.5 House version was, what the 21.3 version, and what the 19.9 version is. The 21.3 is what the House just passed. So if the Senate passes that in this Congress, because we rolled over into a new Congress, they have to pass it again, and signed by the president, that's what NASA gets funded at. But that's apparently not going to happen. And I'm not sure if they are going to have to change any of these numbers around. But I mean, these are all good numbers. They're all basically increases over previous years. The only thing that stays about the same are James Webb Space Telescope, but that's something that they have a funding schedule for that for the next 10 years. Right. Like, they know what they're going to be spending in 5 years on that. Planetary science stays about the same. Earth science goes up a little bit, but I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in some of these cases. And in the case of like planetary science, that's a $2.2 billion line item in the federal budget.
Right. Yeah.
So take a look at that. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever you want to get your questions answered at.
Wherever you kids are social media.
Yeah, wherever your kids are social mediaing. But yeah, so the House is trying to pass a funding bill. The Senate is trying to support the House in passing this funding bill to end the government shutdown. Now, these are two diametrically opposed in more ways than one chambers of Congress, one held by the Democrats, one one that's more proportionally representative of the country, and one that's more of an at-large deliberative body, the Senate, that's held by Republicans with a 6-vote majority.
Tell us how you really feel about the Senate.
We could become another type of podcast if we want to talk about the Senate. We'll have the little explicit tag next to it.
More proportionally representative of the country. I just like that comment.
Well, hey, take a look at some of the pictures shared of the incoming Congress.
I know. All right.
It's a good
move
Congress.
On.
We'll see if it can actually work this time. The last thing I just want to talk about is OSTP has a director now. It's been confirmed by the Senate, and of course he has a very sciencey name, Dr. Kelvin Drogemeyer, who is a renowned meteorologist specializing in severe weather events, thunderstorms, tornadoes, and all that. He was a vice president of research at the University of Oklahoma, served on the National Science Board, which oversees the National Science Foundation up until 2016. He was vice chair of that body that oversees the National Science Board or Science Foundation. And he has, quote, helped pioneer the science of storm scale numerical weather forecasting. So this is a guy that knows his weather. So this is sort of quite a departure from, well, maybe not quite a departure now that I think about it, with Bridenstine being the head of NASA and some of the other appointees that the administration have put into positions of power within science organizations within the federal government. either practicing scientist or someone who understands that if they don't know science, they have people to rely on. In the case of Bridenstine, this was Drogemeyer was nominated last July, July 31st, 2018, and it took until now to approve him in the Senate, which is, again, this goes a long way to say, like, the administration's been appointing somewhat qualified people to hold positions of power within the science regime in the federal government. And it's just taken the Senate a very long time to get it through the usual process, to get it to a floor vote and then get that person into the job. Now that OSTP has it, granted, it also took the Trump administration a very long time to even nominate someone for OSTP director. Now, OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy, is the organization within the White House that they handle everything dealing with science and tech. That includes space, that includes National Science Foundation, NOAA, parts of the EPA, anything dealing with research kind of falls under OSTP, and their job is to consolidate all that, explain it to the stakeholders within the White House and the executive branch what any of this means, and make recommendations. Now that we have a National Space Council, a lot of the space things that OSTP does have sort of been taken away from it, and it'll be interesting to see what the dynamic is within the East Wing as to what OSTP is doing and what Vice President Pence is doing with the National Space Council. So that could also have an impact on the number of times the National Space Council meets. All in all, will be a very uncertain year with government shutdown beginning of the year. Government shutdown at the right beginning of the year, starting last year. And although some key positions within the administration will be filled, there will inevitably be people that leave as the 2020 electoral cycle starts to heat up. I've heard as many as 40 people on the Democratic side interested in running for president. Maybe not all of them are as high profile as others, but this could be a year that we get candidates that are more focused on science policy, more focused on space, because those have previously been niche issues and haven't had as high of a ranking on the totem pole of policy priorities within either party. But now that Democrats that want to run for president have to sort of find what their thing, what their trick's going to be to try and influence voters to support them, we could see someone who's running on a pro-space platform, or someone who's running on a platform that only looks at things through the lens of climate change, which I've heard rumors that there will be a certain governor from the state of Washington doing that. But it'll be interesting to see who runs for president, who announces, who drops out even before the primaries begin. The primaries don't begin until January of next year, of 2020. Iowa, I think, is January 4th or 5th of next year. So we have another year from recording this before the first caucus takes place. And
but the campaigns have started already.
The invisible primaries are what counts. There will be, I would say, there will be at least 24 people that announce that they will be running for president in the next 6 months. We already have 5.
And we'll talk about this later, but one thing that we need to make sure that we focus on is holding whatever candidates come into play accountable when it comes to climate change and space funding as people who support this community. We'll discuss sort of a little campaign that we'll put on later, but that's one thing that I want to make sure that at least I focus on throughout the year, and hopefully our listeners do as well.
Yeah. So be sure to keep your eyes to the news if you can stomach it, and figure out who's running for office, who tickles your fancy, who's the far left, crunchy, liberal candidate that you're going to vote for when your primaries come around in a year and a couple months. Who's the centrist that is coming at this, looking at things through fiscal responsibility. Like whoever your person is, we want you to get involved. We want you to stay informed and keep them informed about what issues matter to you. Every campaign will have a hotline that you can call, or an email that you can send and say, hey, I care about climate change and we're going to help you do that. Like Newton said, we're going to talk later about a little campaign that we're going to be running later this year to get you out there, knocking on doors, talking to voters about why you care about the issues that you care about. Newton, what's happening in the next year in space, in tech? The tech stuff.
Not a whole lot. we're not really doing anything in technology
Well, yeah,
in the United States.
government
No.
shutdown. We have
The
to
government shut down.
we had to deorbit all our satellites. It's just
Yeah,
routine.
they're all gone. I mean, I tried to
Don't try
access
to use.
GPS.
I was gonna say, don't try to get the best route to Starbucks to do your
Nah.
work. You
Yeah,
know, it's
they're all gone, and they're never coming back either. Once they come down, we have no way of getting them back up.
Yeah,
It's just,
no.
that's it. That's
Elon,
right.
I think, was coming up with this idea, a rocket ship. I think is what he
Yeah,
called it.
Oh yeah, that's right. So now that we've deorbited all our satellites, Elon is going to put them all back up himself. That's what I heard. At
He
least.
physically will take the satellite, put it on the back of a Tesla semi-truck, and drive it into space for you.
Through a hyperloop.
Through a hyperloop.
Don't forget.
A one-lane tunnel into space. It's
Oh,
like a space
God.
elevator,
All right.
but underground. So it doesn't really go to space.
Anyway. So how we're actually going to do this, latest in tech. Basically,
That's 2 minutes the
I
listeners
went,
will never get back.
No, yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. But anyway, how we're doing this latest in tech. Basically, I come through a number of news stories and just sort of future space events that are happening this year, and just took a look at all the ones that are sort of related to technology, and thought I would just pull out and highlight one for each and every month. So we're going to get started right off the bat here in January, an event that has already happened, a historical event. We're going to start off with China. So, and we're going to talk about how on January 2nd, China scored a touchdown of their U-2 rover on the far side of the moon. So China reached a milestone in space exploration. This was last Wednesday for our listeners, landing a vehicle on the far side of the moon for the first time in history. This was announced by their space agency and then followed up by an announcement from our space agency, as well as a thank you tweet from Jim Bridenstine about this. So the probe sent back to the Earth the first close-up image of the moon's far side using a relay satellite that China calls Qijiao, or Magpie Bridge in English. And it included images that the agency said were taken by the probe. Chinese officials for a while have voiced a desire to send astronauts to the moon, and the nation's leadership places a premium on doing space-related things that have never been done before, such as landing on the mysterious lunar far side. So one thing that I wanted to make clear about this, because I did see a number of stories that stated that China was landing on the dark side of the moon. The moon doesn't officially have a dark side, and I noticed these stories popping up because there were a number of comments saying
Pink Floyd fans.
Yeah, I know. I'm
agony.
sorry, but there were a number of comments that I saw online that was saying, "Oh, if those pictures." If those pictures were of the dark side of the moon, then why was there light back there? and I just want to clarify that when we say there is no dark side of the moon, the Earth faces the same side of the moon at all times, just based on it being tidally locked with the Earth and its orbit. So when we don't see the moon, that means that the sun is typically shining on that far side of the moon, or whatever quarter or segment of that side of the moon that's not apparent to us. So typically that's what we mean when we say the far side of the moon. It's just it's the opposite side that's not facing us, and the sun shines there all the time. This rover landed there as the sun was shining on that side of it, and took some really neat pictures that we saw. I don't know, Jack, did you take a look at those online at all?
Yeah, and they have the rover that has the tracks. Over the last 2 days, there's been 3 or 4 pictures that have come back, and the rover itself has moved a couple times.
Yeah,
awesome. It's cool to see new space photos.
Yeah,
right?
we've never
especially
explored
on a place that we've never seen.
Yeah, we've never explored this place
up close like that.
What's that?
We've seen the far side of the moon, right?
Yeah,
we've seen it from other satellite photos, but we have never been up close and personal.
Landed on it, yeah.
So a question I wanted to ask you, actually, was, so how are they able, there's not a satellite, right, that the Chinese are using, or are they? How are they communicating with with their spacecraft.
So they have a relay satellite called Magpie Bridge, and right now they're working on building the world's largest radio telescope. That can communicate with object that can better communicate with objects, for instance, on the far side of the moon, like U2. This is not going to be the only mission that they launch to that side of things. They've launched that relay satellite. I want to say this was a couple of years ago in preparation for this mission. I thought we reported on it as well. I would have to go back to the show notes and look it up. But yes, they have a relay satellite that communicates with it. They're sending images to that satellite. Satellite then relays those images back to Earth. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for new news in China going to the moon, executing a number of missions on the moon. They have once again, their agency is hyper focused on continuing to send new probes and things like that to the moon. So
I just looked it up. Magpie Bridge, the satellite that's relaying all this information, was launched in May of last year.
That's okay. Yeah, because I know we reported on that at a certain point in our international news section.
It was definitely because this is a pretty new mission too. It wasn't really announced by the Chinese Space Agency until, I would even say 2 years ago. 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
Because their thing has pretty consistently been that they don't announce anything until it's like a for sure thing, and they're already building.
Yeah, I was going to say they've already been working on it and really are confident that it's going to happen. They're not going to James Webb it for like a better.
Hey now, don't.
I'm kidding.
Diss the federal government because we're more transparent sometimes, like once in a blue moon, once in a far side of the moon.
I can diss the federal government all I want. They're not working right now. They're not in operation.
Yeah, they're pretty transparent. You can just look right in. There's nothing going on.
There's nothing going on.
In like 25% of it.
All right. Well, we can't spend that much time on each one of these or else it's going to take forever. All right. So early February, something to look out for. So remember NASA's InSight lander, that thing that did the whole cool, parachute and retro rockets, all of that on Mars. It landed on Mars. We went through the 7 minutes of terror. This was December 2nd, I want to say, around that time. So they're going to begin drilling.
I thought the 7 minutes of terror was like November 8th, 2016, like at like 10:30.
I see what you did there. That was more than 7 minutes. that terror hasn't ended.
That was
it's still going on.
the 7 years of terror.
Anyway, moving on. NASA's InSight lander should begin drilling into the surface of Mars in early February. InSight's mission is to get into the geology of Mars with more detail and depth than we ever have before. To that end, it's packing gear for 3 major experiments using a collection of 6 seismic sensors, appropriately called SEIS, that will sit on the ground under what looks like a tiny kingdom and monitor the slightest movement of the ground underneath. Tiny high-frequency vibrations or long-period oscillations, all of those things should be detected. The heat flow and physical properties probe is an interesting one that they're using for this. It's going to monitor the temperature of the planet below the surface continually for the duration of the mission, but in order to do so, of course, it has to sort of dig its way down. And for that purpose, it's installed with what the team calls a self-hammering mechanical mole. And that's the thing that's going to actually be doing the drilling. The mole is sort of like a hollow, inch-thick, 16-inch long nail that will use a spring-loaded tungsten block inside itself to drive itself into the rock. It's estimated that it's going to take somewhere between 5,000 and 20,000 strikes to get deep enough to escape the daily and seasonal temperature changes that occur at the surface. So for them to be able to detect enough of a significant difference.
I was going to say phrasing. That last thing you said, but
you waited too long.
Oops, I said it too long. I did wait. I'll edit it so that I say it right.
Insert it in post. Moving on to March. So look out for that in February because that's going to be really exciting. I'm going to be geeking out about that. In March, Boeing should be conducting an uncrewed test flight of its CST-100 Starliner vehicle at some point during the month, with plans for a first crewed test in August. Boeing's Crew Space Transportation, CST 100 Starliner, was developed in partnership with NASA as a part of the agency's Commercial Crew Program. It's the same program that birthed SpaceX's Crew Dragon. Once again, SpaceX partially funded by NASA, doing really interesting things, not just doing them on their own.
like majorly funded by NASA when it comes to sending humans to space.
Oh, yes, certainly. Yes.
SpaceX would not be doing this to this extent.
No.
With the Dragon 2 capsule.
No.
If it wasn't for NASA funding. But the Starliner is very interesting. This will be the first time that an American company will fly a crew-rated vehicle in space under a NASA banner, right?
Absolutely.
Almost in this decade. The last time that the U.S. launched any crew-rated vehicle was in 2011 to end the shuttle program, STS-135. And we have not launched astronauts since. August this year could be the first time that Americans will fly on an American rocket off American soil into space.
It's going to be...
Now I sound like a Trump voter, but...
No. You sound like an
America.
Listen, these are
America.
These are member berries, all right? That's what this is.
Member berries?
These are member berries. You remember when we used to fly into space? I remember. All right.
Wow.
That was a South Park reference. Built to accommodate 7 astronauts or a combination of astronauts and cargo, the reusable spacecraft capsule is, once again, the first human-rated orbital spacecraft built from scratch since the Space Shuttle Columbia. It features a weldless design, which reduces the risk of structural issues caused by traditional welding. So this goes back to sort of the precise manufacturing that we've been talking about. The design of the low Earth orbit bound craft also allowed for a faster production time and reduced mass. So we hopefully we'll be able to generate a number of these over time, and we'll be able to do it, faster and cheaper as time goes on. In addition to, this is my favorite part of this report, in addition to onboard Wi-Fi for entertainment and communication purposes, Starliner features autonomous docking hardware and software for its trips to the International Space Station, and there's an airbag system designed for ground-based landings. Boeing hasn't shared any of the receipts, but back in 2014, its contract with NASA was said to be worth $4.2 billion, awarded in phases and meant to cover the production and construction of 3 spacecraft. So really looking forward to that one.
Well, so if a thing I just want to add on to this was CST 100. So it's based off the whole commercial crew program, this whole idea that if if the federal government gives a contract to a company to build a thing, that a spin-off version of it could help commercialize an industry. Boeing was actually at the center of the KC-135, which was a refueling craft for the U.S. Air Force that was designed back in the 1950s. That craft went on to become the 747, the most commercially successful airliner in human history, modern history, because we didn't have aircraft back like 500 years ago. But because of a government contract for the U.S. Air Force, the KC-135 became the Boeing 747, which went on to create the modern commercial airline industry. So the creation of the CST-100 with the commercial crew program could create a legitimate market for commercial access to space beyond what we already have, where people are spending, $200,000 to get their name into a hat to potentially fly on Virgin Galactic's launcher, or to fly with SpaceX on Starship, whatever that Elon calls it.
I don't trust it.
I don't trust it either, but Boeing could be the first one
Boeing
making the step.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, on some things I would not trust Boeing, but for the most part, when it comes to commercializing a government contract to create a whole new marketplace, Boeing's pretty good at that.
Yep, they're pretty damn good at it.
I am looking forward to the CST-100 and those beautiful blue spacesuits that they have. Go watch Stephen Colbert has a great thing where he tries on the spacesuit that Boeing created for the CST-100.
Oh, really?
It's awesome. It's Stephen Colbert, so it's hilarious, but it's also super informative. It's only a couple minutes long, and it's stunning. I will link that down in the show notes. I'm gonna go grab that link right now.
All right,
so move on. Let's talk about April. April showers.
What's happening in
Shower
April?
us with news.
All right. Well, this doesn't have to do too much with showers. Actually, it's going to get pretty hot. So this is about NASA's Parker Solar Probe, named after famed NASA scientist or physicist Eugene Parker. He was a professor emeritus at University of Chicago. It's going to be making its next close approach to the sun on April 4th. Now, if you remember, on November 5th, 2018, the Parker Solar Probe brought us closer to the sun than we've ever been, and it flew past the sun at more than 212,000 miles an hour. That's nearly 120 miles per second. I almost said 120,000 miles a second. 120 miles per second, which is 3.3 times as fast as the Juno spacecraft that's currently at Jupiter right now. That's fast enough to fly from New York to Tokyo in less than a minute. But Parker Solar Probe will make 2 more flybys this year, each closer to the sun and slightly faster than the one before it. The goal is to crack 2 60-year-old mysteries. One, why the sun has a solar wind and dangerous mass ejections of particles, and 2, how the corona, the star's outer atmosphere, can heat up to millions of degrees, about 100 times as hot as the sun's surface temperature. So concretely, those are its research missions. Parker Solar Probe will also zoom by Venus on December 26th, 2019. That maneuver will use the planet's gravity to draw the spacecraft into a tighter orbit around the sun. So they're having a lot of fun with this Parker Solar Probe. I believe this one came out of Hopkins APL, actually. Another Hopkins APL design, like New Horizons. I believe they had about a $1.5 billion contract to put this thing together, and hopefully we'll be able to use it to find out more information than ever about our own sun, because as people are often surprised when I tell them, we don't know a lot about the sun. It's this thing that heats us up and sustains us. We don't know a whole lot about why it does what it does. I mean, we understand the process from a sort of a nuclear fusion standpoint and stuff like that, to a decent extent, but we just don't know as much as I think the public generally thinks that we know about it.
But I thought the sun was a massive incandescent gas, a giant nuclear furnace.
No, but it is.
The sun is a miasma of incandescent plasma.
Well, first of all, it's all the dead kings from history. If you haven't seen The Lion King, come on, it's fairly simple.
All right. Last joke before we go on to May, but I really hope that the tool, the instrument on board that they're using to discover what it makes up the sun's corona, or to study the sun's corona, is named limes. Just because I think the pun.
Oh my God!
You put limes in the corona.
All right, moving on to Jesus Christ. I want to see them fire limes at the corona, not
fire limes.
Anyway, May 8th. So we're talking about tech, we're talking about research. May 8th is the World Climate Congress in Phuket, Thailand. The Climate Congress 2019 is going to be the annual meeting conducted with the support of the organizing committee members and members of the editorial board of the supporting of the climate conference, and they'll be supporting climate-related journals, and it's aimed at helping support environmental professionals in delivering the best solutions possible to environmental change. It will gather world-class professors, scientists, researchers, students, environmentalists, all to discuss methodology to reducing global warming, climatic change, and its effect, pollution, and recycling. The assembling of this event will deal with the subject of tackling climate change for a sustainable future. Once again, it will be held on May 8th through 9th, 2019 in Phuket, Thailand. This is the 8th World Climate Congress. So that should be interesting. Look for news, announcements, and tons of new technology popping out of that.
And that mixed with the new report that the U.S. government put out just after Thanksgiving, which we did want to sort of talk about last time.
Oh, yeah.
The National Climate Assessment 4, the full report has been released. We had been talking about it over the last year, a draft version. Essentially, the draft version was the final version, plus or minus certain language. But that was put out on Black Friday.
They had to change the theirs, the their and theirs, and the your and yours throughout the whole document.
Crossing the I's, dotting the T's, all that stuff. And
people need to learn to use spell check before they submit things. That's really the real issue here.
Well, I mean, it's what the rest of the administration does, right?
Moving on to June. This is not a politics podcast. June.
Did you hear me earlier?
In June, we're allegedly going to have the first crewed launch of the SpaceX's Dragon capsule. This is gonna be launching from Cape. Jack, stop shaking your head. This is gonna be held.
Nope. If you told me June 2025, sure.
Stop shaking your head. This is gonna be launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's on the calendar. All right. I have my calendar right here.
Falcon Heavy 2 was on the calendar.
God. This is going to be the first launch of astronauts from U.S. soil since the final space shuttle flight on July 8th, 2011. I promise you that is what SpaceX says. On board will be NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Douglas Hurley, both on their third space flight, according to SpaceX.
Has anybody checked Elon's Twitter? He hasn't changed it in the last 5 minutes. So I did see that that Falcon Heavy 2, the first parts of it have started to arrive at Cape Canaveral. Mm-hmm. So we could see Falcon Heavy 2 sometime this year. Granted, in Elon time, it is still late 2017. So if the calendar says June 2019, in Elon time, that must be like 8 years from now, at least.
Oh my God. I'm going to move on in July.
Come at me, muskrats. Come at me.
Send your tweets to
Jack _ Corelli on Twitter. Jack Corelli on Facebook. Come at me.
All your tweets to him. Moving on to July. And I just wanted to highlight this one because there's going to be a number of events about it. But this is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11.
Newton, what was Apollo 11? I don't remember that.
It was the first mission to land humans on the moon.
Who was on that? Was that? Oh, that was Louis Armstrong, right?
It was Neil Armstrong, and there's another gentleman by the name of
Edwin Aldrin. Edwin Aldrin.
I'm gonna go with Buzz Aldrin. Who was on that mission?
Louis Armstrong and his cousin Buzzcut. Got it.
Yes. So it'll be the 50th anniversary. If you thought there were events for Apollo 8, good Lord, there are going to be an insane amount of events for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. I think I went to at least 4 Apollo 8 events last year. I don't know about you, but there were quite a bit.
I think there will be a National Space Council meeting on the anniversary. I think it's the perfect time. It's the perfect time for the administration puts out Space Policy Directive 5, all about we get humans to the moon. Like, make it a big day. Like, because it is a big day. It's 50 years since we did that.
That's a huge deal.
I'm a little sad that we don't have as concerted a political atmosphere right now to like actually make something good happen on that day. Like, for all we know, like we aren't going back to the moon for another 15 years, right? With the way technology is going, we haven't had as many great updates as we've wanted. I know we've talked over the last couple of years that like, oh, this year's going to be the year for space. This year's going to be the year for space. But it's been the year for space, but just not in the ways that we think. And everyone is so...
There's a lot of progress. There's a lot of progress.
That's what I'm saying, is that there's been a lot of progress, but just not in the ways that we think, that we're traditionally thinking of, like, oh, sending humans to space. We're going to be doing that for the first time in 7 years this year.
Yeah.
So
From American soil. Yes.
From American soil. Yeah. I mean, but granted, they've been flying the Soyuz since the 60s. Yeah. So, like, it's not like we were flying on some newfangled technology. Like, we're flying on the same thing that Yuri Gagarin flew on, essentially.
But also, as you pointed out, the fact that this is Boeing doing it, I mean, that's also a pretty big deal because, like you said, they already have and understand the processes for taking this thing from being a government experiment and moving it into the private sector. So not to hype up Boeing that much, but let's move on
We
to
are not sponsored by Boeing.
yeah,
I
no.
promise you that.
But although Boeing, if you want to sponsor us, just hit me up.
Hey, at Jack_Pirelli on Twitter.
Yeah, seriously.
Slide into those DMs.
Yes.
Boeing company.
Anyway, in August, I swear to God, this is not intentional. Jack doesn't even have this list. August, Boeing could conduct
I'm riffing over here.
Our event for August is Boeing could conduct crewed test flights of the Starliner in August. Once again, hyping up that big event. That's going to be massive.
Wait, what's the Starliner?
Yeah, shut up. All right.
rewind this. If you are wondering what the Starliner is, rewind this episode 20 minutes, and we'll tell you exactly what it was.
Seriously. All right. September. This is a big one. The UN 2019 Climate Summit. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will convene a summit to mobilize political and economic energy at the highest levels to advance climate action that will enable implementation of many of the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The UN 2019 Climate Summit will convene on the theme, quote, "A race we can win, a race we must win." End quote. And it will seek to challenge states, regions, cities, companies, investors, citizens, your mama, your daddy, everybody to step up action in these 6 areas.
That's the soundbite right there.
Energy transition, climate finance, and carbon pricing, industry transition, nature-based solutions, cities and local action, and resilience. The summit will build on the outcomes of the Global Climate Action Summit, GCAS, the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly, and the 24th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, among others. This climate summit will take place in parallel to the 2019 high-level dialogue on financing for development, the FFD. These events on September 23rd are taking place the day before the first HLPF meeting under UNGA auspices opens. So
now,
tune into that one.
I thought the UN was renamed to the Council of the World's Biggest Losers.
Biggest losers who are passing us on. All right, October. A new planet hunting mission from ESA, which is going to be fun to watch, will launch sometime between October 15th and November 14th. So that's this may be a November one, but we're going to be optimistic and say that this may happen in October. It's called CHOPS, for Characterizing Exoplanets Satellite, and it'll look for planets orbiting bright stars close to our solar system. So keep an eye out for that one. November.
Well, do we want to do December 1st? Because November's kind of the big announcement thing.
Yes. So we're going to skip to December, and then we're going to go back to November of 2019. All right. So December 2019, Japan's Hayabusa 2 spacecraft will depart the asteroid Ryugu, returning to Earth in December 2020. The selection for Hayabusa 2's touchdown on Ryugu was made recently, as in yesterday, and it's in the final stage. The space agency had to abandon its first touchdown attempt that had been scheduled for late last October due to a rockier than expected surface. Last September and October, JAXA conducted a total of 3 landing rehearsals on potential sites. Basically, during the rehearsals, the agency succeeded in lowering Hayabusa 2 to a point 12 meters above Ryugu's surface through the use of laser sensors that allowed the craft to autonomously control its positioning, but it didn't actually make the landing. So they're picking an actual touchdown site. So we'll keep you posted about that. There should be news in our international news section on that in the next few weeks. So on to November 2019, the big event there.
Doesn't start for 365 days after it, right?
Yes. Yes, that's accurate. We will be 1 year from the 2020 election. So in November 2019, the big event is to start campaigning for people who support climate change and space funding. So we want to, we at Ad Astra will try to compile a running list of candidates across the states, state, local, and federal, who actually support climate change action and space funding, not people who support climate change happening.
Yeah, no, I think we already have the guy who supports climate change happening to get more beachfront property at Mar-a-Lago.
Seriously. So what we're going to ask you to do is take the Ad Astra challenge. Address your carbon footprint by volunteering or supporting 6 campaigns, 6 being the atomic number for carbon, that support climate change action and space funding. And each time you do, challenge a friend on social media to do the same. We're going to be running this campaign starting in November 2019 and continuing it throughout November 2020. So keep an eye out for that in November of 2019.
Yeah. And just so everyone knows, I just looked up the dates. I'm going to correct myself from earlier. The first caucus of the 2020 presidential cycle is on Monday, February 3rd. In Iowa. The New Hampshire follows that on Tuesday, February 11th, and then on Saturday, February 20th.
2020.
Yes, this is 20. This is 2020. Yes. This is not this year. 2020, not this year. February 22nd, which is a Saturday, is the Nevada Democratic caucus, and then Saturday, February 29th, is South Carolina's primary. So those are the first 4. So those are the big important ones, and then we get into all the other states: Alabama, California, Massachusetts, North Carolina, all the way through to the District of Columbia, all the way down. So those are the things that will be deciding who the Democratic nominee will be. And yeah, everyone should take the Ad Astra challenge, help out 6 campaigns. It's kind of a fun number. Like 6 is easy, right? That's 6 days.
Yeah.
That's just a couple hours on 6 days.
I'd prefer you do more than 6 days, but
as a professional campaign manager, I would like you to do 60 days, but I'm not going to ask you to do that because nobody cares about what is the atomic number 60, like strontium or something like that.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, 6 campaigns, it's easy. 2 or 3 hours, do it with a friend. Go out, knock doors, make phone calls, stuff letters, seal envelopes, call people, text. The texting apps are cool. I'm telling you, you can text thousands of people in a day on those the campaign texting apps, and they're wildly successful. We saw that in 2018. We had some of the highest turnout numbers in areas where those Florida, Georgia, Iowa, California, Texas, where those texting apps help get out young voters who maybe don't know that an election's coming up. So 6 campaigns, it's easy.
Also, just a point of clarification, atomic number 60 is neodymium. Excuse me. Neodymium, there it is. And it apparently has a heavy use in magnets. It's used to create powerful permanent magnets that are used in microphones, professional loudspeakers, in-ear headphones, high-performance hobby DC electric motors, and computer hard disks. So there you go.
So very much needed EM.
Neodymium. Neodymium. It should have been called neodymium. Neodymium is a terrible name for it.
Nemodian is those things in Star Wars with the Trade Federation.
Moving on. So
the moment the Phantom Menace gets mentioned, he doesn't want to talk about it.
Coming soon to space. So for this coming soon to space, I just wanted to talk about a few events that are literally happening in space to look out for. So taking a look at the night sky, if you guys happen to be in some of the areas where these events are, you may want to take a look at the sky to look for something weird. Most of these within our own solar system. In fact, I think they're all within our own solar system. So on January 20th, there will be a total eclipse of the moon. The total phase of this total lunar eclipse will be visible from North and South America and western parts of Europe and Africa. And if you're in the DC area, the total lunar eclipse is fully visible in Washington, D.C. This is what's often called a blood moon, as basically you're looking for the moon to turn red. January 22nd, we've got Venus and Jupiter coming into a close embrace. They're going to be edging a little close to each other, getting a little close to each other. Edging may have been the terrible word to use there.
Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe just phrasing.
Just phrasing.
Change it a little bit.
Yeah, all right, yeah. Venus will be passing about 2.4 degrees to the upper left of Jupiter. Augmenting that display off to their right is the bright ruddy star Antares. So make sure you take a look out for that. There will also be a lovely crescent moon that will join that array on January 31st.
Just so everyone knows, Jupiter and Venus are not actually going to be that close, but
no,
you all are smart.
From
letting you know,
yeah.
Really, that was a notification for Newton. I just want him to remember that they're not actually that close.
Yeah, they won't be getting there. I don't have. That's an entire podcast to explain all of the things that would occur if they were actually super close.
Newton understands depth perception.
Yes. February 18th, we got Venus and Saturn. Venus is going to pass just over a degree to the upper left of Saturn in the morning's pre-dawn sky. It will be one of the closest bright planet conjunctions of 2019. February 19th is going to be the biggest supermoon of the year. These are always my personal favorite. I love seeing the moon when it's massive. Last year in 2018, the month of February had no full moon at all, but this year's February presents a much different story. As February 2019 will show off the biggest full moon, supermoon of 2019. By the way, that bright star accompanying the February supermoon will be none other than Regulus, the brightest star in the constellation Leo the Lion. So this February full moon will usher in the second in a series of 3 full moon supermoons occurring on January 21st, February 19th, and March 21st, 2019, respectively. All of these full moons are less than 362,000 kilometers distant as measured from the centers of the Earth and the Moon. The full moons of January, February, and March 2019 are regarded as supermoons because of their relative nearness to the Earth. So moving all the way into July 2nd, we're going to have a total eclipse of the sun. You guys all remember the amazing eclipse that we all saw back in August of 2017. Well, we're going to be able to see, well, we won't be able to see one, but the folks in Chile, Argentina, as well as parts of New Zealand will be able to see that eclipse. Unfortunately, I had to cancel my trip down there to go and fly off somewhere else. But hopefully, if you can make it down to Argentina, Chile, it is well worth the trip. Once again, especially if you missed it in North America the last time. Definitely worth the trip. Moving on, just scrolling through my list here. August 12th through 13th, you got the Perseids meteor shower. Most of the folks who are listening to this know what the Perseids are, but basically they're considered to be among the best of the annual displays, thanks to its high rates of up to 90 per hour for a single observer, as well as its reliability. People who typically do summer camping and city dwellers who are just out in the country love seeing the Perseids when they light up the night sky. I'm trying to remember when we went out to West Virginia on a planetary trip. Did we see the Perseids? Was that in August or was that later?
No, that was end of June.
Okay, yeah.
We saw a shooting star.
Yeah, that's right. We were.
But that was just because
shooting stars. Yeah.
you get like 5 or 6 of those a night anyway. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, there's
stuff
tons
burning
of stuff
up in our atmosphere happens very normally.
Yeah. So moving on, November 11th. You're going to see a big transit of Mercury. I actually saw this in a number of things that are happening in space this year. I didn't realize people were like this hyper focused on it. But on November 11th in 2019, Mercury will transit the sun for the first time since 2016. That transit or passage of a planet across the face of the sun is a relatively rare occurrence. As seen from the Earth, only transits of Mercury and Venus are possible. There are approximately 13 transits of Mercury each century, which explains why people are going crazy over this. In comparison, transits of Venus occur in pairs with more than a century separating each pair. let's see, November 24th, we got Venus and Jupiter. Close embrace number 2. Um, Venus and Jupiter will be very low in the southwest during the chilly November dusk. Their overtaking of each other this month occurs with a glorious conjunction that is further enlivened by background stars. For the second time that this year, those two bright luminaries will have a rendezvous. Back in this case, they're actually going to be a little bit closer to each other from our perception. Venus will sit about 1.4 degrees to Jupiter's lower left. A couple more of these. November 28th. This is right after Thanksgiving. Basically, we're going to have 3 bright planets and the moon all gathered together for a breathtaking view on the early evening of November 28th, Thanksgiving Day. The 2.5-day-old crescent moon will join Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn in the multicolored evening twilight. So after a giant turkey dinner, go out, check out the night sky. And last but not least, December 26th, we're going to have an annular eclipse of the sun. This is also really neat and interesting. A solar eclipse typically occurs when the moon passes between Earth and the sun, thereby totally or partially obscuring the image of the sun for a viewer on Earth. So we're going to get that in July. But on December 26th, an annular solar eclipse will occur. And this is when the moon's apparent diameter is smaller than the sun's, blocking most of the sun's light and causing the sun to look like an annulus or a ring. An annular eclipse appears as a partial eclipse over a region of the Earth thousands of kilometers wide. This large annular eclipse will cover 97% of the sun, creating a dramatic spectacle for observers in a path up to 118 kilometers wide. It will last 3 minutes and 40 seconds at the point of maximum eclipse. Unfortunately, you will have to journey across the Earth to see it. It's going to be seen from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, across southern India and Sri Lanka, to Indonesia and Malaysia. The partial eclipse will be visible across the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Or Australasia, as this article calls it. All right, you got anything else, Jack?
I would like to go back because I'm reading about that transit of Venus because I wanted to see when the next one is. Well, the next one isn't until December 2117.
Yeah.
And that's a long way away, but what's even longer away is a simultaneous transit of Mercury and Venus, which won't happen until the 26th of July, year 69,163.
Oh, that's close to my birthday.
So
it's my birthday.
Set your clocks for the 700th century?
The 27th century. Would you say 20? You said 2600 something? 2600?
No. So 26th of July, in the year 69,163.
Oh, 69,000. Okay, gotcha.
So it's the 700th century.
Yes. Jesus.
So just mark your calendars now. But yeah, no, I don't got anything else. All right, one more thing before we end this episode. So, since our last episode, former President George H.W. Bush passed away, just months after his wife Barbara Bush passed away. H.W. Bush leaves behind a whole family of politically active people, including former President George W. Bush, presidential candidate in 2016, Jeb Bush, and a number of other children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I wanted to highlight this because H.W. Bush was prior to really, he was one of the first big presidents that dealt with space leading into the 21st century. He took Reagan, of course, worked on the space shuttle and space station Freedom. Carter also helped further the space shuttle. Nixon was the Apollo missions and beginning of shuttle. But Bush was the first president since Kennedy to really kind of make a very declarative statement on sending humans to the moon and onto Mars, in more than just a sort of annual thing that you say in your State of the Union. He actually put action in out of his words, and that was the Space Exploration Initiative, which fell flat on its face after about 90 days after it was announced. That was the last time that we had a National Space Council, but it just goes to show that regardless of party lines, there is a lot of interest in space, and this dates back all the way back to the 50s and 60s, the 90s, and today. There's a lot of interest in space, and as we get into this next presidential cycle, we have to realize that space is an important part of the American experience and a part of the human experience. It's not just an American enterprise, it is a worldwide human enterprise, and that is why we need to protect it and protect our planet from climate change. So in the show notes, I have former President H.W. Bush's speech in front of the National Air and Space Museum on July 20th, 1989, exactly 20 years after the Apollo 11 landings, with Buzz and Neil and Michael Collins. And he talks about addressing climate change, and he talks about addressing the needs that we have here on our planet and how we can do all of that and still go on and do great things in space. Also, the 90-day study that he wanted NASA to do to show the feasibility of his plan to send humans to the moon and Mars, and just the political will wasn't there at the beginning of the 1990s. So it's all about timing. It's all about that confluence of factors. All about that that formula. You have to kind of get it to work. And unfortunately, President Bush wasn't able to get it. Clinton was able to get the International Space Station, but really not much else. Bush 43, not much happened there. Obama ended the shuttle program, and now under Trump, we're still kind of in this weird in between. And that's why if you use your voice and volunteer with 6 campaigns starting in November 2019, you can help get space on the agenda in the next Congress, in the current Congress, in any Congress after that.
Nice
and
segue.
We can, yeah, right. But yeah, that's, I'm going to get off my soapbox there, but yeah, your involvement is key. And I really hope to see you out there, talking to members of Congress, talking to your neighbors, talking to other people, encouraging them to vote for pro-space, pro-climate change candidates. Climate change action. I caught myself.
Yeah, there you go. All
Not
right.
pro-climate change candidates. Those ones suck. The pro-climate change action ones.
Yes.
But that's all I got. I'm glad to be back. Newton, Happy New Year. It's going to be a great year.
Happy New Year.
We're going to have a lot of awesome content coming at you guys, and we promise this time that it will not be 2 months before our next episode.
Yes, promise. All right.
All right. As always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton
At
Astra.